Hey folks, welcome to my channel Code. This is Swapnil Gosavi. In this session, we will learn how to do simple CRUD operations using Spring Data JPA. In this session, we will do project setup, and in the project setup, we will be using S2 database as a data source. We will learn to create entity. We will create a repository to interact with a database, and then we will perform CRUD operations. We will expose repository operations using REST API. For that, we will use Spring Data REST. Let's create the project. I will be using IntelliJ for creating a project. Click on the new project. I will be using Spring Initializer for initializing the project. Let's give some name. Spring Demo Application. Change the group name to com.codage. I will be using Java version 11. Let's click on the next. Let's add some dependencies. Let's add dev tool. For database, add h2 database. I will be using h2 database as in-memory database for a demo purpose. Let's add JPA. And for data REST JPA, let's add REST repositories. Let's click on create. Give time to initialize the project. Once the project initializes, we will start the project and we'll check if there is any error. Let's run the project. We can see the project is started successfully. Now let's try to connect to database. What will be the URL? Localhost colon 8080 slash s2 hyphen console. Let's try to connect database. It is giving error as testdb database is not found. We will add properties in the properties file to create a database. Property that we will add for creating a database is Spring data source dot URL equal to. What will be the URL? Let's copy from here. Right? And one more property we will add here. When JPA runs the query in the background, we want to check in the console what query is running. For that, we will add Spring dot JPA dot show dot SQL equal to true. Right? Let's restart the application. Let's refresh this page and try to connect. We can see we are able to connect to the database successfully. This is how we completed our project setup. Now we will create entity class in the application. Entity class will be used for storing a data into database. We will store student data into database. So let's create entity. We will create a Java class with the name student. Right? We will give one annotation that is entity. What it will do, it will convert student object into the table in the database. We will provide one more annotation, that is at the rate table. The name of the table in the database will be student, and that will happen because of this at the rate table annotation, right? We will add few fields into the student database. Let's add ID for the student, name for the student, and let's add age of the student. Now we will require to add one identity column in the table. For that, what we will do, we will add one more annotation here. It is at the rate ID. We will provide getter setter for this class. So generate getter and setter for all the fields, right? Also provides toString method, right? Let's restart our application and we will check if the table is getting created into database or not. So application started successfully. We will refresh this page. We can see the student table is getting created. Let's run this query and we can see the table is get created. Now, this is how basically we have created the entity. Now, what we will do next? We will create one repository class for interacting with the database for doing some certain CRUD operations, right? Let's add repository. Now, we will extend one interface which is called JPA repository. It requires type of entity that it's need to handle. So our entity is a student and it requires one identity column. Identity column in the student is of the type integer. So we will provide a type here, right? And now this is how we have created the student repository. If we see in the JPA repository, it provides certain methods, that is find all to get the data from the table. Then to save the data into a table, it has a method called save all. It has multiple methods, like to delete the record, it has a delete methods, right? And basically JPA provides inbuilt functionality for this all the methods. Now, what Spring Data REST provides us is it provides one annotation called repository REST resource. What it does, it builds on a top of the Spring Data repository and automatically export this method as a REST API, so that using REST call we can operate on this repository. Let's restart our application. Now, how to do a REST call for this repository? Let's check the Spring documentation for that. Spring Data REST. Let's go into the documentation of Spring Data REST. Click on the reference document and search for the supporting methods. You can see what kind of HTTP methods supported by Spring Data REST, and in the background, which methods get called by repository. When we call the GET from the REST API, basically it runs following method, that is find all. It also supports other methods. Like if you want to save data into database, we will call post REST API, which under the hood call save method of the repository. Let's say if you want to delete data from the database, it provides delete functionality, and under the hood it calls delete method of the repository. So and let's try to save some data into database. I will be using Postman for sending REST request. I will be sending post request. What will be the URL, right? So here what we can do, we can provide a path, and it will be a common URL for all the methods. Let's say give some URL like data. Okay, and let's restart the application. Once the application started, we will try to save student data into table. For that, we will provide this data ID, name, and age in the JSON format in the post body. Let's give it a URL localhost 8080. What will be the URL that we have recently added? That is a data. And we will provide data in the body in the JSON format. So click on the JSON. Let's create a JSON data. So what is the JSON data we will require? Let's go into the student object. We require ID, name, and age. So ID will be 1001. Give it a name. Let's give a name as a swap name, comma, and last is age for the student. Let's give it as a 24, right? Now what we will do, we will send this post request to the application, and we can see we got the response for the post. Let's check in the database if it is get added into database or not. It refresh this page, then the select query, and you can see the data has been added into database. Let's have few more data into database. Let's change the name to 2. Change the request, right? Now we can see in the database that record has been added, right? Now what we will do, next we will get the records from the database. For that, what we will do, we will send a GET request. So let's create a GET request colon 8080 slash data, and we will send this request. Now, if you see, oops, if you see, it has written the records of the student in the form of JSON. And here you can see that we have added name Swapnil with the age 24, right? It has second record as a Sanjay with the age 28. Now, it also provide us some link, right, in the each record. If you copy this link and run this again with the gauge, you can get details for that particular records, right? So this is how we can get data directly from database without creating or without writing any other code. Now what we will do, we will delete records from the database. For that, what we will do, we will send a delete request. URL will be localhost slash data, and the URL we will send ID of the record which we want to delete. So what is ID? Let's say we want to delete this record 1002. So we will provide that ID here 1002. We will send this request. Now let's check in the database. Let's run the query and you can see the record has been deleted, right? So basically how Spring Data REST remove the boilerplate code that require us to perform some operations. So as we have completed our simple CRUD operation, very minimal code we have written here for performing this operation. We had added one property to see query in the console, right? I made one mistake here. It should be hyphen. Now, when we send REST call from the postman, in the background, it runs some query, right? And that query we want to see in the console. So let's restart the application and let's check how it is getting displayed in the console. Now, let's do a post request. We want to add some data into database. Right? Let's add some ID. Let's say give some name as Rajesh. Right? Click on the send. Okay. Now in the console, if you see, it's showing some query like insert into student with the data. Right? If we do a get request, let's do a get request. Let's send a query. If we see in the console, we can see that it is running select query to getting a data from a database. So using this property, we can see all the queries that is running in the background in the console. Thanks for watching the video. Please like and subscribe if you like the video. Bye bye.